Good morning to everyone. We're going to kick off the next panel, and we'll shepherd everyone back to their seats and ready to join. So I want to introduce our panelists. We have three wonderful people to talk to this morning about a different cut at trust, transparency, and technology than what we've just heard. Those are fascinating context for what we're about to consider. Our three panelists, first Marcelo Tournier, who's director of SESI in Santa Catarina, Brazil. SESI is a private nonprofit organization that takes care of education and well-being programs for 1 million employees in the manufacturing sector. Our second panelist is Yangbin Wang, who is chairman and CEO of Vobile. They recently received the Emmy for Innovation in Video Identification, and so we'll have some great insights into authenticity and verification. And our third panelist is Emily Withrow, who's director of Quartz Bot Studio, as well as a professor at Northwestern. She's focused on building narrative experiences for voice and messaging platforms. Each of our panelists is going to give you a short presentation, and then we'll have a chance to split questions between me and the audience for our panelists. So if we could, let's have Marcelo kick us off, please.
Very glad to be invited here as member of mediaX community to share a story and to show you some of the things that we are doing with the support of this brilliant community and the highlights that we get in each year of collaboration, which is built up in each step in which we built these technologies, as I will show you with the story. So SESI Innovation Center for Health Technology is part of SESI, which is the social service for industry in Brazil. It's a huge nonprofit organization, private and nonprofit organization who takes care of workers in manufacturing, construction, mining industries, industrial-related activities. So we receive contributions, financial contributions from employers all across Brazil, and take back to their workers social services for the improvement of their health and well-being. And now we are with the challenge of supporting the development of new programs with increased efficacy and also increased scale. And we know that technology is very good for both of these outcomes. So we're now worried about developing new technologies related to health, increasing health literacy in workers, and also improving their preventive skills so they could be more healthy and productive at the workplace. At the same time, we are worried about the high number of deaths and fatalities related to workplace injuries and accidents. And we are worried about this taking care of development of new technologies that could prevent and make the workers could return to their homes in their best conditions. And also, we know that behavior and behavior change is essential for both of these challenges related to health and safety. So we study deeply new ventures or new technologies that could improve these outcomes. So when we started to see how important it is to build trust, it is almost automatic for us in Brazil to take a look at the labor relations system in our country, which is a broken relation system in terms of trust. Because as you can see, workers, employers, even the government has different opinions and different visions about the same issue. It resembles that story of a lot of blind people taking a look at an elephant in different perspectives, because each one of them that touches the elephant in a different part of the body of the elephant has a different insight about what they are feeling or what they are touching. So we started to understand how important it is goodwill and trust in means of bringing those players together to solving this problem. And SESI started to bring up this narrative as good worker health equals good business, and good business equals good economic and social development for our country. So this is the narrative that we started to work with them, but as we started to study what really is goodwill and trust, we started to see how complicated it is, because trust and goodwill is understood differently by different cultures. And the first time that we saw this was in Finland, after 15 days discussing with Finnish PhDs and masters, and our researchers, masters and PhDs from Brazil discussing about what really is goodwill and trust, because in different cultures, we started to see how different it is to understand and to start to build up into these concepts, to starting to build things together. So using this kinds of knowledge and with the collaboration of our good friends from Stanford, we started to build a process of designing for goodwill and trust. And what is design for goodwill and trust? Actually, it's related to, at first, listen and to using empathy and co-creation start to build upon commonalities that those players has, and putting those people into adult playgrounds. It was funny because they started to disarm their rehearsed discourses of what about the things that the system doesn't work, and they started to find new solutions for those problems. And here I would like to make my personal thanks in behalf of SESI for all the mediaX community, and especially for Marta and David Evans, who gave us huge support for this initiative in Brazil. Please, I would like to have a hand for them. So we developed some prototypes related to this, and we started to test these prototypes and congregate these into the community. And this solution is related now to artificial intelligence and sensors, who are starting to measure up some risky behaviors for workers in the construction industry in Brazil. So we are starting to test them, and with a smart helmet, we start to get some of those measures related to their behavior in different environments in a construction site. And it was very interesting because hearing the workers and the government, they were very concerned about their privacy. And we made very sure for the workers and for the government that the workers were not in any kind of surveillance system. What we really surveilling here is the risk, not the worker. So for this, we tested, and we are congregating here, see people from SESI, along with people from the companies, also educating the workers in a very plain Portuguese way, very easy to understand the principles that guide the technology and how important it is for them to surveil the risks and to protect their lives. And finally, I would like to share with you some of the principles that we are using to guiding this building of new technologies. I got it borrowed from Cecil textbook of medicine, as I am a physician, and I know, like a colleague said earlier, that in the emergency room, you need to think very quickly, and you don't have time to think about Plato or other philosophers for ethics. But these are very practical ways for building ethos for technologies, and we are doing this in our day-to-day practice. So I'd like to thank you for your attention and for letting me share my story with you. Thanks.
Bobo is a new member at mediaX, and this morning, I've listened to the previous presenters, and it's really exciting subject. And for the next 5 minutes also, I'm going to just share a little bit of what we've done. Is somewhat related to the subject, more from a technology background and platform. Vobile is a company, focused on content identification for the last more than 10 years, and we primarily provide solutions to the media industry, the studios and TV networks, in this country and some in other places like in Japan, to help them to deal with the content, basically distribution, authentication, and in some way the piracy issues online. So we are considered the largest and the best in this field. And I have personally, I've been living in the Silicon Valley as a resident for more than 20 years, and my last 20 years working experience is in the media industry. Just go back a little bit of history, I think we will understand the challenges are facing by the industry. Early on, I think if we go back 20, 25 years ago, this is when digital compression technology enabled digital video. This was the first beginning, and I, was very pleased. Actually, met one of my former colleagues, Frank, back here. And when I worked for Compression Labs, that's when we developed the first technology. Really is the real-time MPEG-2 compression that enabled DirecTV, the satellite television transmission. And at that time, the whole like a pizza box that size would sell for $100,000 roughly. And today, with a cell phone, every one of us holding the hand, I think that's less than $1,000 in price, and then it's more 20 times or even more powerful than that. The technology advancement really has changed in the industry profoundly. It used to be the media industry is in a world of, I would say, authenticated in both ways. When audience watching TV, you know where the content comes from because there's only limited channels. Even people want to express and doing things, if it costs you $100,000 to encode a channel, not to mention how to distribute it, it won't be a world like today. You see all the flooded with information and misinformation, fake news. And also, authenticating in a way is that the content owners knows where the content goes. The set-top box has a conditional access card inside, so it knows where it goes. And the satellite, have same facility that people will know where this content goes. So, like the viewership, it can be measured. But today, with the internet world, I think a milestone was about 10 years ago when YouTube was launched, 2005, and later on, quickly it caught very, very popular. And today, certainly, the video is not privy to YouTube, social network like Facebook, and they all have this video capability. So the video can be transmitted in many, many different ways. In that world, I think the media industry felt immediate threat is that their content, they spend a lot of money developed, now can be replicated and distributed in many different ways. And the litigation started with, and the piracy was early on. The Saturday Night Live, was one of example. And this content can be transmitted over many different places. And immediately, that threat brought to the industry is their business model. So they were relying on subscription model, on paid content. They were relying on the free-to-air content. They relied on the ad-sponsored model. But nowadays, those content can be transmitted in different channels and on different platforms to many different viewers that they're unable to collect royalty on the payment, or they're unable to charge properly on the advertisement. So that's where our technology, the content identification, came into play. And we developed this technology 10 years ago, which is by fingerprinting every single frame, both the image and audio, the soundtrack, so that we're able to automatically identify the content when they were distributed online. So that brings, I would say, certain countermeasures. Certainly over the years, we'll also see the technology, the people are using technologies to try to evade the automatic detection by changing the content. And then going forward, I think even technology can bring some sanity and some balance to address the problem. I think it's far from even dealing with the content itself. Nowadays, technology, essentially can put words in people's mouth. You can have almost an image, looks real, that with your speech there. So I think those are the subjects, we discussed early on today, and I don't pretend we have a technology solution for it yet. So today I'm more here to have a conversation, to hear the debate, and also, sort of bring us more thoughts and to see where we go from here. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share.
Hi, my name is Emily Withrow. I am a journalist at Quartz. I'm director of the Quartz Bot Studio. It is a lab where we do applied AI. So what we're doing is looking at emerging technologies, including much of what's going on in the artificial intelligence space, and we try to figure out how news and information fits into that puzzle. So this means everything from looking at AI as a tool that we can use to empower our reporters in our newsroom to do better reporting, to all the way through presenting that information, storytelling, and we're looking particularly today, I think, at conversational interfaces, so thinking about voice and chat. So if you're unfamiliar with Quartz, we are a 5-year-old company. We're part of Atlantic Media, so Ben Bradley is at the top of our chain. And we have a bunch of different editions. We have Quartz India, Quartz Africa. We are very globally focused. We have Quartz here in the United States. We have bureaus across the globe. In the products that we have put together in the Bot Studio, 60% of our readers are outside the US. We also have a lifestyle brand, Quartz at Work, which is our management edition. So if you're unfamiliar with us, please go find us. We have apps and everything else. I'm going to talk a bit today, when I think about trust and transparency, I'm really going to try to focus my remarks not to journalism as a whole. I don't think 6 minutes would really be enough to talk about that. But I am going to talk about going into new spaces, new platforms, new technologies, and how we evaluate and sort of what we've learned in those spaces as how do we extend trust and authenticity and transparency in spaces where we don't have all of our normal tools available to us. So specifically, I'm going to talk a bit about a product that we launched earlier this year on Facebook Messenger. So we are in the bot space with all of sort of the good bots and the bad bots. We could talk a little bit about that. But I wanted, we went there, we put out projects for our users, we put out news for our users, and things that are not news, sort of evergreen content. We call them curiosities, things that people are curious about but that don't necessarily follow the news cycle. Just to give you a concrete example, one of the projects that we have is bread baking. So we think about how would you take a normal article that would appear on a website or in the paper, which would just be a bread recipe, right? With instructions and a little bit about, I don't know, yeast, that kind of thing. And here we built a coach that actually walks you through every step of the way, allows you to troubleshoot. We really thought about what it would be to have that sort of coach or experience that was more of an interactive walkthrough for a very different kind of content. So what have we learned about chatting with people? What have we learned from our 5 or 6 months in this space so far? One, this is not a website. So when we think about trust and when we think about authenticity, again, many of the tools that are available to us to try to present ourselves, to be transparent, to tell readers where and how we got the information is not there. And so we really have to think about, with the absence of something like a byline, with the absence of hyperlinks, in the absence of a clear way to do attribution in this space, we've really had to think about how to redo that. So in these conversational platforms, you actually have to build time into the experience to say, and by the way, the I here is Emily Withrow. I'm a writer at Quartz. And it's a little clunky and strange, but we really think it's important to, in this space especially, let users know who you are, where you're taking them. And I think journalism has made many mistakes going on to the web and sort of treating it as a newspaper, which it is not. And so one of the things that we're trying really to do in these spaces is to understand the unique attributes of each platform and to try to build our journalism to those spaces, to take advantage of those unique attributes and to understand how people are behaving and using those spaces so that we can sort of fold ourselves into people's lives in a way that has as little friction as possible. One of the other early lessons that we learned in terms of trust and transparency is that too much choice is overwhelming. This kind of also falls in, this is a review we did of Stranger Things. But one of the things that we found is, you go in, you think, okay, options, menus, what are my normal tools that we use to tell stories? And this is actually quite overwhelming for users. And so we really have learned that we need to step in and have the authority to guide people and give them actually many fewer choices. This is related. Forks make people very nervous. Another mistake that we see people going into this space doing is that they are always presenting users with choices. As we know from psychology, choices are not always the best thing. We don't always feel better with more. And so what we've tried to do too is instead of making these choices that fork people along a path, what we're doing is building a lot of emotional intelligence into our stories. We're allowing users to react. So the structure of the stories that we're telling in these spaces is more of a chain structure where we're allowing people to react, we react to them back and forth, and then we get back to the story that we were going to tell in the first place. 5, this is a huge responsibility, I think, for us in news, is that in all of our research and in all of our interviews with users, people say that they feel that this is a personal, private channel. It is not, right? Anything that users are entering on Facebook is not ultimately private. It goes through Facebook before it comes to us. And so this is a big responsibility for us in terms of presenting news to understand what that means about the way that users behave and to deal with that data accordingly. And 6, too, I think in this space is that we're considering the destination more, I think, than we have in other spaces. In order to pull, it's not scannable. You have to pull people through very carefully along the way. And so we really have tried to build in a lot of information along the way about where we are going, invest users in the destination, almost like a radio program, really, so that we are pulling them to the end. So this is a bread photo. The bread takes 20 hours to bake. It's a user journey that is 20 hours long, and we have people who do the entire thing and then send us victory photos of their bread at the end, which we're really excited about. So I think this also points to greater user participation, greater involvement with our readers, greater understanding, greater ability to individualize and tailor the news for them, which helps, I think, build trust ultimately with our readers. I'm going to leave it there. I have too much to say, but we can get to questions in a moment.
So I'm going to kick us off with a couple of questions, but then I'd definitely like the audience to dive in. There's very different takes on, part of my excitement about this panel was the range of what it means and how to interpret. Transparency varies a lot here. So let's take one of those. Yangbin's work focuses very directly on authenticity. So let me turn it instead to Marcelo and Emily to say, can you tell us a little bit about an example of authenticity and what it means for your platform? Marcelo, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. One of the things that we needed to show to some of those stakeholders, especially for the government and for the workers, is related to data. And we know pretty well that using data, raw data, can be a two-edged sword. because you can bring up a lot of different issues if you don't interpret the data right. And then we started to show them that the data that we would collect for the workers and for the workplaces could be used for good deeds, and also in an ethical way, not being sharing all the data that we had for the companies and for the employers for surveillance measures for the workers. And by the other side, a lot of those employers were worried about productivity issues, so they asked us a lot for the data, but we showed them that we could really get good results sharing the data in a different kind of way for being good for everybody. So this is the way in which SESI entered as a middleman into these stakeholders to build it and to make it very clear that the information and the authentic using of this information could be good for everybody.
Great, thanks. Emily, can you comment on authenticity of voice, for instance?
Yeah, sure. I mean, authenticity, again, in journalism, I think can take on a number of different meanings, because we have the authenticity of the information that we are presenting, right? So how do we authenticate information? How do we present that information? How do we educate readers around the process of authentication? And then I think we have the authenticity of a brand or a voice, right? So I'll speak to the last one. It's a little bit, it's maybe the least problematic of that list. But when we think about authenticity, I think in terms of news and journalism, we're really talking about how we embody trust, right? And one of those is to be really transparent about how we're collecting information, both the data in these spaces and the authenticity of the information, right? So how do we bake into each story an understanding for the reader of how we have obtained the information, who the sources are, how we came about that information. And three, really, I think this is a shift in the last 10 years or so, understanding that news organizations are not a sort of monolithic thing with one voice and one perspective, that we are a collection of people. And I think Quartz really works there to understand that we are a collection of people across the globe with different perspectives and different ideas, different backgrounds, and we try to bake that into our articles as well.
Thank you. So we've seen examples forever of technology being introduced and evolutions occurring. One that comes to me is at the very beginning of the transition from barter to money. Government said, aha, we'll actually take known metal, make that into a coin, and circulate that. That was a great idea, lasted probably a week, who knows. And very quickly, people figured out, hey, well, the government nicely did that for us. We'll just clip off some of the gold around the edge of this coin. We've got a coin and leftover gold. Cool. So the technology response, Isaac Newton, when he ran the mint, he helped bring in ridges, milling it's called, around the edge of the coin. And that was a quick and just the very beginning of a long range of fights that he had with counterfeiters, trying to use technology to counter technology. Perhaps, Yangbin, could you tell us a little bit about how the technology moves forward on detection and authentication, but then it also moves forward on how to falsify things?
Yes, so in the world of our business, while we're looking at authenticity, I think it's two different layers. One is we're helping these studios and TV networks, and they spend enormous money to produce the content. These are valuable content. So one layer of the authenticity is that they relied on distribution, through this licensing, copyright licensing, and so they can collect the proper revenue so that support the industry. Ecosystem, their income. And one challenge they're facing, and this is through our working experience, that they used to deal with is that they sell content through limited amount, entities, large organizations like sell to Comcast, license to them, or certain channels. And in this internet world, their content being carried on all these platforms, and they've been sold globally and relicensed many, many times. So the authenticity of these digital rights, distribution rights, is becoming a challenge. In one real example is that we had was helping a Japanese content owner that they have a program through our system that they can identify, we automatically help them identify where the content goes. They find it on a website. So they say, well, we never licensed to them. So that's illegal and piracy content. We need to take it down. And we contact that website on behalf of the content owner. And they say, well, we bought it. And we ask them to show, where did you buy it? They say, well, from a distributor. And here is a piece of work, and they are authorized to license the content. And we got a copy of that and sent it back to these content owner. And they say, again, it was in Japanese, we couldn't understand it. There was stem, chop, and everything. And they look at it, they say, no, it's a fake. Why? Said, one, the language, it's in Japanese, but it's a high school level Japanese. It's not the Japanese lawyer's language. Secondly, he said the chop is the right name, but with a date, actually, that person is no longer in that position. So he shouldn't be the person chopped that contract. So it was a fake. So what I'm referring to example is that in the world of today, with such a magnitude, order of magnitude difference of distribution complexity, that technology used to be able to manage by lawyers, in-house lawyers on spreadsheets no longer work. So maybe blockchain or maybe some new technology can start to address that problem. Certainly, another layer of authenticity is the content itself. Yep. We've seen people taking this movie and chopping to different pieces, and that certainly evoke another level of this, discussion. And one, it changed the content itself, may have different meaning. And then secondly, how does that, copyright, is that still a fair use or copyrighted material? And how do you, address that? That's another issue that we need to deal with.
Maybe that's just a response to, as consumers, we go to the latest Marvel movie and we want to edit an hour out of it too.